everybody? It's your boy Gsluke here with our fades and sleepers for this week's Fortinet Championship. At this point of the week, we have ownership projections, and even more importantly than projecting players is making sure we consider the game theory side of DFS, whether players are overowned, underowned, our ability to get leverage to them in our set of lineups are all things that we have to consider when constructing our lineups and going out there and trying to take home a GPP sort of contest. So here, we're going to talk about some of the more notable ownership spots, whether players are overowned, they're going to be fades, guys that I'm avoiding, or on the opposite end of the spectrum, guys that are perhaps diamonds in the rough, a little bit lower owned than they should be, that are good spots to get leverage to. So with a lot to get to, not going to waste any time at all here, let's go ahead and hop on in. We'll kick this off with our fades, and up top, we're going to have Corey Connors up first at $10,300, and while he projects to a solid median projection, there's always one issue with playing Corey, and that is his upside. Outside of his win, his first ever start on the PGA Tour, and a few other top 5 since then, he's really a top 25 made cut machine, but doesn't post a ton of top 10, top 15s. Now, the one counterexample, of course, would be his second to last performance, where he finished at the top 5 at the BMW. But before that, you can see 28th, 21st, 28th, 61st. And if you keep on going back, it's just made cut after made cut, but not very many top 5 or top 10s to speak of, whereas there are plenty of players like a Pendrith, for example, who may not be consistent, but look at all these nearly top 10 finishes. 8th, 13th, 2nd, 11th place finish, 13th here at the Barbasol. I'm looking for those spike sort of players rather than those consistent players in a GPP sort of format. And I do these ownership projections for large field contests, GPPs with 20 to 100,000 sort of entries, and Corey Connors is still 23.7% owned. So he's still getting plenty of attention around the industry. People are using him in these large field contests, and frankly, with his putting stats on Ben Poa, he's a lot better on Bermuda, even a little bit better on just pure bent grass. Leaves me to want to look at other players up top. So I won't be getting to Corey Connors. I think he lacks a little bit of upside. And look at his course history. He hasn't played here over the last 2 years, but in 2020 finished 13th, had a missed cut the year before that, and then a 30th. So hasn't really done that much damage here over the years. And overall, is somebody that I personally feel pretty comfortable leaving out of my pool. Next up, we've got Emiliano Grillo, who's a similar player to Corey Connors, where from tee to green, Grillo is going to shine above the rest of the field, but typically deals with issues putting. And on the Ben Poa surface, that is especially true, where over the last 3-year sample size, so it's not over the last, 4 to 8 rounds, that sort of thing. It's a pretty sizable sample here. He is losing a stroke per round on Ben Poa. That is among the worst that you'll see in the entire field. There's a few guys that are actually even worse than that, and the course history to this point hasn't backed it up, right? Missed cut. His best start was a 29th, 28th place finish back in 2018. He's lacked a lot of the top end upside, and outside of a few recent finishes where, sure, he's looked pretty good over the last few starts, 19th, 31st at the FedEx St. Jude. The second was the highlight of all of them there at the 3M Open. He was dreadful before that. In fact, if you take a look at his last 50 measured rounds, he's the odd man out here. The one guy up top other than Maverick who's not getting it done on approach, also pretty sorry around the green. And in fact, the putting has actually been a positive for him, which we know that's extremely inconsistent. That's not a strength of his that he can rely on consistently out there on tour. And even though the last 24 rounds paint a completely different picture, when you can see him out there gaining significantly both off the tee and approach and with the putter, I just don't know if we can expect that to be sustained, particularly now that he's been off for 2 to 3 weeks, has been working on his game. Maybe it took a little bit of time off, could come out and look like the old version of himself. So I don't think he's worth being chalk. As of right now, I got him at 14.1% ownership, which isn't mega chalk, but for this 9K range is a lot higher than somebody like Hoagie, who we'll talk about here in a second, but also higher than guys like a Brendan Steele, and especially higher than somebody like a Denny McCarthy. And the last fade we'll touch on is going to be Trey Mullinax, somebody who, much like a Grillo, ended the year with a torrent stretch of golf. So if you take a look at his finishes, you'll see that he had a 12th place finish, a 5th place at the FedEx St. Jude, a bunch of made cuts. Of course, the highlight was a 1st place at the Barbasol. So definitely, a stretch of golf that was pretty much unmatched over that stretch. And over the last 24 rounds, the reason why everyone wants to play him is he's gaining across the board. Gaining on approach and off the tee. We're used to seeing that from Trey Mullinax. He's an exceptional ball striker. But the around the green and the putting, just getting that to a slight positive was enough to take him to that next level. The unfortunate part is the more and more of a sample size that you give Mullinax, it just starts to fall apart. I mean, first off, the short game falls back to a negative like we're used to seeing from him, frankly, for the last 2 to 3 years. Even the approach play comes back down to earth, and the off the tee play isn't up there in the top 5 to 10 of the field anymore. So Mullinax, I think he's a solid value play when he's $6,700. You get him at a bomber sort of golf course. But now that he's $8,300, you're investing a good amount of salary into him. He's 12% owned. Again, just like Rio, you've had that 2 to 3 week stretch there where now you've had time away from the game. Who knows if he's going to sustain that momentum that he had there at the end of the season. I tend to agree that most players at this point are going to revert back to their long-term sample size. And from the long-term perspective, Mullinax and Grillo are both well overpriced for this field. All right, and now for our sleepers, the players that I think are being a little bit overlooked by the masses this week, and Tom Hoge definitely fits that description. Unlike Emiliano Grillo, from the long-term perspective, Tom Hoge has been a damn good player, and for just evidence of that, look at his 2021 resume with somebody who had multiple top 10 finishes, 4 or 5 throughout the year, and instead of going out there and finishing first in like 2-3 events, getting to East Lake that way, he did it with the single win at Pebble Beach and then a bunch of consistency across the board. So Tom Hoge, though he didn't fare all that well at the Tour Championship, is still somebody that I'm extremely bullish on long term. And at $9,300, though the shots gained metrics haven't been the best over the last 50 measured rounds, I do like the direction that Tom Hoge is moving with some of his recent performances. And just to give you an idea, even in that rough stretch of golf, it hasn't even been that bad. Still gaining off on approach. Off the tee is accurate, not that long there, so we never expect him to really be gaining in bunches in that category. But even with some of the short game categories, a loser with the putter, that's going to happen. He was really cold there. That's the why he struggled, missed a few cuts over that stretch. But one thing to note about Tom Hoge is that at this golf course specifically, he's found quite a bit of success over the years. So when you take a look at his course history, you'll see that he's made a bunch of cuts here. He's made 4 out of his 5 cuts. He has 1 top 20 finish, a bunch of top 30 finishes, just a lot of consistency and experience around Silverado Resort. And while I don't think it's a golf course where you have to have that experience, like an Augusta National, a St. Andrews, for example, where it can be extremely beneficial, I do think that it's going to at least give him a slight boost, right, over some of the rookies, players that are seeing this course for the first time. So at $9,300, he is single-digit owned, just 9.1% in terms of the projected ownership, and making him one of the only single-digit owned plays of anybody above $8,000. So I like getting to him. I think he's a good spot of leverage, and you only have to take like 15, maybe 20% at the very most to get the kind of leverage that you're looking for. Next up for the sleepers, we have Alex Noren at $8,100, a player I certainly have a love-hate relationship with. He's in the AM wave, which is the advantageous one that I'm looking for. He's also only 7.6% owned, so single-digit owned, which is one of the lowest of anybody in this lower 8K range, top of the 7K range sort of portion of the player pool. And what I like here is his long-term pedigree, a better player than Justin Suh. We know that. Better than Trey Mullinax, Taylor Montgomery, at least at this point. Even guys like a Troy Merritt, Brendan Steele. I'd argue that Alex Noren has a lot more pedigree. I mean, in terms of international wins, Alex Noren has a resume a lot more consistent than the rest of them, a lot more deep. I mean, wins on the DP World Tour, a lot of top finishes here on the PGA Tour, even though he doesn't have a win. Somebody who can bring you that top 5 to top 10 upside, and we've kind of seen that of late. I mean, at the Barbasol, had the standout second place finish, had a 30th at the Scottish. I know he withdrew at the FedEx. That actually got me. I had him that week, and he had started pretty awful that week, but still, finish your first 2 rounds at the very least, Alex, but I'll be getting back there. He's a higher pedigree player than people give him credit for, and though he doesn't have any course history to boot, he's somebody that I'm willing to take a shot on. I mean, it's a course where off the tee isn't all that important, and that's the one real bugaboo there with Alex Noren. He's both short and inaccurate, which is really the lethal combination there off the tee that can take you off a tour. But when you get him at a golf course like this, where it's a lot more about your approach play around the green, where he's a wizard, one of the best players on tour, let alone this field, and also a pretty solid putter on the bent POA surface, gives him a more than reasonable chance to go out there and compete, let alone if he has an excellent week with the ball striking and can compete. And lastly, the last sleeper pick I want to talk about here is a little bit cheaper down the board. It's Kevin Streelman at $7,500. He's in the PM wave, which we don't love, right? Again, the AM PM should be a little bit more advantageous, but what I like here is the ownership, 8.5%, which is on the higher end of the spectrum here in the 7K range, I must admit, but based on how he's played over the last month or so, I think that he's coming in lower owned. So recent form here, go down to $7,500. Streelman's been pretty damn decent. His second place finish there at the Barbasol, you can see 49th at the Rocket Mortgage. But more than anything, like when you just look at his shots gain metrics, right, and you put it into a model, I mean, how can't you play this guy, right? First off the tee, gaining over a third of a stroke per round, gaining close to 2/3 of a stroke per round on the approach. When you look at his bent POA numbers, he's unbelievable, gaining 0.61 shots per round. The reason why Kevin Streelman is so good on bent POA is there at the Travelers, he's had multiple top 5 finishes. He's played well at the Rocket Mortgage Classic, and he's even showed pretty well here over the years as well. So if we go here to $7,500, you can see he finished 3rd here in 2021, top 15 in 2018, top 25 in 2019. So when you get him on these greens, he gains in bunches, and of late, that's the only thing holding him back. So that's why the models absolutely love Streelman this week, and frankly, why he's 8.5% owned, and I think it's worth it. I still think it's too low. I mean, based on where he's coming in with the modeling, he should be $8,500 to $9,000. I mean, he could be up there with Tom Hoagie, and I don't think a lot of people would question it. I think the only thing is the recent form, right? The couple missed cuts here of late, there at the Wyndham and the FedEx St. Jude, are probably why he's $7,500. But with that, it's also why he's easy to fit in as maybe a 3rd or 4th man into your lineup. So I love Streelman at $7,500. I love the Ben POA numbers, the ball striking that we've seen of late, and I think that he's far too low owned for what he projects for. All right, fellas, that is all I've got for the fades and sleepers. Before you hop on out of here, go ahead and smash that like button, but also go ahead and comment down below who you're fading this week, and of course, who your biggest sleeper pick is. And we're going to have a weekly live stream tomorrow that'll be at 7 p.m. Eastern time, so make sure to stop on by for that. We'll be touching on the weather, any GPP strategy notes, also, of course, all of your live questions down there in chat. So make sure to bring them on by there. Set a reminder. A link is down in the description of this video to that. So make sure to stay tuned. Also, subscribe to the channel, guys, so you don't miss any of the content in the future. I've been posting a lot of showdown content for NFL, also a few main slate videos, and all of the golf content to boot, right? Course breakdowns, core picks, value picks, this video every single week, that live stream. All content you don't want to miss. So really looking forward to it, guys. Best of luck with all of your lineups, any outright bets that you're going with for this week, and let's get this cash.